Good morning. My name is James Crabtree. Welcome to the latest event in GovInsider Live's Festival of Innovation, which has been running all of this week from here in Singapore, where I join you this morning. Today, we're going to be talking about sustainability matters, how the COVID pandemic has affected moves towards a more sustainable world, how the recovery can be made greener, and what are the best examples that we can look to for inspiration and innovation on climate change and sustainability as the recovery from COVID continues. So this morning I'm joined by a fantastic panel who, in the order in which they will be speaking, so we begin from the top level, joining us from the United States this evening, her time, Kanni Wignaraja, who is the Assistant Secretary General and Director of the Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific from the UNDP. So she will be speaking first. Secondly, to get a sense from the ground here in Asia, we're joined by Emil Dardak, who's the Vice Governor of East Java in Indonesia. And then finally, from here in Singapore, we're joined by Sorkin, who is the Director of the Global Resilient Cities Network, which is the successor organization to 100 Resilient Cities, which many of you will be familiar with. So the way we're going to run this session is each of our speakers is going to speak for about 10 minutes. Kanni and Lauren are going to speak without slides. Emil has a short presentation which he's going to make, but they'll speak in that order. Then we will have a discussion amongst ourselves, but we'll also be able to take questions from the audience. So I know that this morning that this broadcast is going out on a number of different social media platforms, particularly Facebook and YouTube. So if you're watching on those platforms, feel free to leave a question in the comments, and our moderators will look for questions. So identify who you are, give your name and your designation, and if you want to which of the speakers you want to ask a question, and then we'll pick the best of those at the end and put those to the audience. So please do feel free to ask questions as we go along. Very good. And we'll wrap up absolutely on time at 10 o'clock Singapore time or 10 p.m. Connecticut time, where Kanni is. So thank you very much for joining us this morning. And let me turn to each of my speakers one after the other. So Kanni, can I turn to you and ask you to begin our discussion this morning on sustainability matters and the post-COVID sustainable recovery?
Thank you, James. And thank you to GovInsider hosts for putting up this Festival of Innovation. It's great to join everyone and be here with you. Now, I do not have to state our collective concern and confusion about the times we're living in today. Development progress is so fast being undone, and at a faster rate than we were actually able to put it together. And now it will take us much longer to get back on track with the SDGs. And this is of deep concern to UNDP and to the UN as a whole. So as a global community, we really need to now take unprecedented measures to stop this confluence of factors destroying all that we have built and all we want to do for a global future. So I wanted to share with all of you maybe 3 key points where I feel that innovation can really help us get back on track on the sustainability agenda, and maybe even help to accelerate some of the benefits in terms of our own health and the health of our planet. So first, directly tackling this coronavirus. Now, while we knew close to nothing about this virus 8 to 9 months ago, we now have a clear idea what it is, how it strikes, and possibly even what needs to be done. And scientific knowledge and breakthroughs will underpin our global and national health responses and expand it at a speed and scale that we have not seen before. Now, this is much needed as a health response that has to go beyond current levels of testing and contact tracing and treatment to actually reach much, much larger numbers. And we hear it repeatedly said that no one is safe until everyone is safe. But what does this really mean in terms of planning and investments in health infrastructure to cover not just a last mile, but many, many miles? So our UN maxim of leaving no one behind, I think, will be severely tested by the global health effort to get out the vaccine. To ensure a fast and fair distribution of a COVID vaccine as soon as it becomes available will mean managing a highly efficient and robust cold chain, for example. Now, the government of India and UNDP's award-winning program, the EVEN program, which stands for Electronic Vaccination Intelligence Network, we've tested this so it enables healthcare workers to effectively manage vaccine logistics and actually have real-time information on the availability of vaccine stocks and if they're being stored properly. Now, it comes to you as a smartphone app, which helps to manage these stocks. And these are now available and actually being used with other vaccines in over 27,000 centers across India. So this is a kind of blend of medical and digital expertise for fast-acting solutions that'll really be essential if we're to swiftly reach the 4.3 billion people that we are in Asia and the Pacific. Now, Singapore, where you are, has shown us an example of successful citizen tech innovation, which you would be very familiar with, when a group of citizens volunteers and joins up with government to design and utilize Trace Together, the popular community tracing app, and others have tried to emulate that. Singapore is known as one of the leading innovator countries in the world and is very high on the list of the Global Innovation Index. And now we see the Republic of Korea has just joined them in the top 10 countries in the world. But there's also other kinds of innovation that drive sustainability, and that is about doing the right thing early on, which does not always have to be tech-driven or too exciting, but it is the early mover boldness that counts. And this is the story of universal healthcare. And we have seen how it has helped a country like Thailand, for example, much better, where it is in a much better state than many other countries in the region. And this was the weapon which they had already deployed decades ago. Now, a second point, so that's a first kind of bundle, if you wish, of issues. And the second one is state-citizen trust, which is, to me, at a premium during a time of emergence. Now, real-time public communication to provide people with warnings of outbreaks, announcing lockdowns, providing factual prevention and care information, and just staying in regular touch to calm a society's fears. This has been managed very differently in countries in our region. And depending on the veracity of information provided and government's outreach, people's trust in their leaders have either grown or waned. And you can see in countries like Vietnam and New Zealand, the positive power of such public communications and how it has built that kind of trust. Now, beyond the leaders and their relationship with people, mobile and internet access has also been key to making this work. So affordable internet access has allowed people to continue not just with the receiving information, but to get their education, to continue with work, and to stay connected with each other. So if I look at our Access to Information partnership with the government of Bangladesh, which operates about 5,000 digital centers across the country, it provides a connection to all those who need access to public services. Yet, this again is not enough. So we are moving and pushing to ask for affordable internet connectivity that should be provided as a universal public good and made available to all people. Now, in our region, the rates of internet penetration vary quite dramatically, from over, let's say, 90% in the Republic of Korea to around 30% in Timor-Leste. So UNDP is working very closely, particularly with small landlocked and island states, to ensure this greater connectivity. Now, as governments mobilize billions, even trillions of dollars around the world to recover from the pandemic, we can see that those with existing or fast-growing investments in mobile and internet connectivity, moving into 5G, into optic fiber, all those are transitioning much faster into the digital economy. Now, the direction of travel towards this fourth industrial revolution has been inevitable for some time, but I think COVID-19 has been an accelerant. And we're seeing the work of robotics, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, the Internet of Things, genetic engineering, and other technology-driven ways of working are absolutely going to be part of that next normal. And recent research coming out of MIT and others indicates that about 12% of current jobs across Asian markets could be automated over the next 5 years, with AI affecting at least 1 in 5 jobs. At the same time, we know that approximately 70% of Asia's labor force, and I'm sure this is the case as well in countries like Indonesia, is currently dependent on the informal sector. So in order to square this circle, many, many more people will need to get digital learning and skills, and then that affordable access to these technologies and to the internet to actually benefit from the Industrial Revolution will be key, because if not, we'll only be diminished or even destroyed by it. In fact, in the Philippines, we're exploring some new data-powered anticipatory governance models to deal with COVID-19 implications for food security in the country. So the future of work and the future of food production will be very, very interconnected. So James, this brings me to my third and final point, because a vaccine that needs a cold chain also needs a sustainable energy source to power it across all terrains. And the future of work, or the future of food and health that benefits the largest numbers of people are going to be really that keeps both people and planet healthy, is something that will need green energy. Now, according to the Paris Climate Agreement, if we are to remain within the limits of that 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature rise, we need to achieve a 7.6% reduction in CO2 emissions each year for the coming decade. Even with the shutdown of the global economy and the widespread big city lockdowns in 2020, it only resulted in a 5.6% reduction. So just doing the math, this will take a radical transformation of how we produce, how we travel, and how we power up our grids. Now, the social and economic case for renewables is clear. Recent auctions and power purchase agreements indicate that solar energy is now about 20% cheaper than coal on average. Investments in renewable energy is generating 3 times more jobs than investments in polluting fossil fuels. So we are seeing countries pivot, but it's going to take a while. We're just hoping that they're going to do it at a faster pace. And UNDP is supporting governments to bring renewable energy access to some of the most disadvantaged communities in countries as divergent as Indonesia and Vanuatu. And we're urging private sector to invest in renewables as a win-win, because now the economic case is made. And like access to the internet, these efforts have to move rapidly to scale. And that needs public policy coming together with private sector investments. So in closing, let me say that the term scale is often overused. What works for one household or a community or a country need not be optimal for another. However, when it comes to digital connectivity and renewable energy, just like with a COVID vaccine, what is good for one is actually good for all 4.3 billion of us in the Asia and the Pacific. Thank you, and back to you, James.
Thank you very much, Kanni. That was a great introduction. You managed to cover a lot of ground in your 10 minutes. So I'm very grateful for you for putting those 3 points on the table. Let me now go over to Java in Indonesia and hand the floor over to Vice Governor Emil Dardak to give us a sense of how things look on the ground in one of our neighbor countries. So Emil, over to you.
Okay. Thank you. A very good morning to all the participants of this GovInsider Live, and to the moderator, and to Assistant Secretary General and Director of the Asia Pacific UNDP, and also from Global Resilient Cities Network and moderator, James Crabtree. It's a pleasure to be joining this forum. I'll try to also look more into the context of COVID-19 and how it affects the local economy in East Java. Just to put a bit of context first, East Java is the second largest province in terms of population in Indonesia. We have 40 million people spread over 38 municipalities. And in terms of economic size or our regional GDP, we are also the second largest after Jakarta. In terms of population, we are the second largest after West Java. So despite the fact that we're not the largest province in terms of population, but we are still the best after Jakarta in terms of the economic size. Now, that gives an idea on the scale of impact and scale of activities that we have to manage in times of this pandemic. So if I can share with you a couple of slides. The first one is a very simple explanation that this COVID-19 creates both supply and demand shock. So factories can't operate, shops cannot open, transportation has to be limited, and this affects the productivity, but at the same time also household that loses their occupation, households that no longer can attain income, result in lower demand. So both supply and demand were contracted, and we saw that the massive decline took place in the second quarter of 2020. Our economy in 2020 went into contraction in the second quarter. In the first quarter, we grew usually by 5% and above, and it went down to approximately 3%. And in the last quarter, it went down to 5.9%, although it was still the least contracted economy in the island of Java. Next. So if we look into what we're trying to do, I think none of us believe that we can or think that we can eliminate the pandemic unless we discover the vaccine, as was very comprehensively explained by the previous speaker from UNDP. But we're trying to flatten the curve. We want to avoid a situation where patients went, untreatable because of the lack of medical facilities. So we did we pursued two methods. The first being trying to increase and scale up the medical facilities, but at the same time, we tried to reduce the level of mobility and economic intensity in order to flatten the curve. Now, this process of flattening the curve extends the lifetime of the virus, of the pandemic, and also create a negative impact to the economy. But we have to do that because I think we need to make sure that we don't have an unmanageable number of cases in East Java. Now, on the right-hand side bottom is basically a diagram showing which sectors actually lost and which sectors actually won in terms of the pandemic impact. And products such as pharmaceuticals, food and beverage, electronics, telecommunication, logistics services, and even to a certain extent, textile manufacturing that were able to refocus their production into producing masks and hazardous material suits. They were able to survive and even triumph during this moment. But those that relied on tourism, on mining, construction, some financial services, even automotive sector, they actually suffered the most during the crisis. Next. So what did we try to do? First of all, in terms of economic impact, what is very important is to make sure that nobody, that we were mindful of the fact that more people are below the poverty line because they lost their income, their livelihood. Now, we need to introduce social safety net. Now, in Indonesia, the value-added tax and income tax all go to the central government and comes back to local government or subnational governments by means of transfer funding. Now, local governments can collect certain taxes. For example, in the provincial government, we collect taxes on automobile licenses and also purchases of new cars. And municipalities, such as cities and other local governments, they collect taxes from land and also from revenues of entertainment or restaurant establishments. Now, these are car sales as well as entertainment establishments, and property taxes are ones that suffer the most. But at the same time, we did not have the liberty to pursue deficit financing like what the central government does. But we try to make sure that we can actually still reallocate our budget accordingly to save those who are in dire financial situation. Now, we introduced what we call the provincial social safety net, and we designed that to be in complementary with what the central government has designed. So central government has embarked on roughly 6 to 6.5 million families intervention, providing them with cash support over the course of initially 3 months. Now, we discovered that when provincial funding is coming in, we need to make sure, 6.5 out of 13 million families are being supported by the central government. I have to revise my number, 6 million families. Now, in that situation, we realized that there were families that weren't accessed by these financing as well, and we need to come in. So the easiest way politically for a political leader is to simply just distribute the funding pro rata based on the population, or just spread it evenly. But we discovered that some municipalities suffer more than others because the economic structure varies. Some municipalities rely more on agriculture and on primary sectors, and while others rely on industries, manufacturing, and trade. Now, the intervention from central government in terms of social safety net actually inclined more or skewed more towards the rural area, where rural area actually benefits from the fact that their production activities in agriculture can still continue and they have lower cost of living. While in the urban areas, most of the activities got shut down and they also have higher living expenses. So what we did is we designed 2 programs. The first is social safety net that provides supplementary support on top of what the central government is providing, strictly for those who are living in urban areas. We provide 50% of what the central government is providing. And for the other areas, we provide social safety net that are allocated using quota. And these quota are calculated based on how many percent of the population have been covered by central government support, and how many percent of the population relies on sectors that are hit the most, which are tourism, restaurants, and also trade and services, and some manufacturing. So that's what we did for the first 3 months. But now, if we go, I will explain a bit more, but we try to focus more on reigniting the economy. Although we are mindful that we are still facing problems in the spread of the pandemic. We haven't really concluded our first wave. We're still on the rise, but the daily numbers have not risen. So we've been hovering around. So while previously we have probably not so exponential, but rising daily cases, But now the daily cases are hovers around 300, sometimes less, and sometimes 400. But it's on that cruising altitude, if I can say. It hasn't gone down, and we try to make sure that we put in enough efforts to keep it that way, and put it decline, so we don't loosen up or relax it a bit. Okay, so finally, to wrap up, I'd like to also mention that next, if we go next, okay, to the last slide. Let's go to the last slide. I'll try to answer more on the details in, okay, sorry, just go to, okay, the previous slide. So we can see that in the third quarter, a lot of the activities are returning to nearly the pre-pandemic level in quarter one. And we are very mindful that this is also, we need to be cautious about this. So what we do is, central government is pushing in a lot of funding in the forms of cash support and even expanding liquidity of banks. We also have provincial government banks, which has taken in roughly $200 million, and we put in some of our budget to put a revolving fund to be funding activities and trying to reignite the supply side economics. And carefully managing the reopening of activities is important to put a bit of room for demand, but also not to make sure that we don't have cases going beyond our capability or uncontrollable. With that, I conclude the presentation to start with. Thank you much.
Thank you very much, Emil. Again, many thanks for giving us that overview. It's interesting to hear how progress is being made at the local level, and we can come back to some of the other things that you're trying to do and how you see the outlook in Indonesia. Let me now turn over to Lauren from the Resilient Cities Network to give us a sense of how the battle for urban resilience in the face of climate change has been affected by the pandemic and the look forward from there. So Lauren, over to you.
Thanks so much, James. Thanks for having me this morning. For those of you who aren't as familiar with our work, the Global Resilient Cities Network is a city-led network, and we are the world's leading urban resilience network, representing 97 cities in over 40 countries and 220 million citizens. We are based here in Singapore. 20 of our city members are here in Asia Pacific. And we are the only global network of cities to be based out of Southeast Asia. We're very proud to be here. As I begin, I want to say for those that are listening, thank you for tuning in. There are a lot of these kinds of presentations, and I really hope that the information and knowledge that we're providing today is going to be useful to you as you're responding to this obviously unprecedented time. I want to also share, as I begin, two perhaps less obvious facts. One is I am a millennial and I am an optimist. And I say those two things because I am part of a generation, along with Generation Z that comes behind us, that's grown up with technology enabling our lives. And we're also a generation who will have to lead as we confront more and more of these compounding crises. And the only way that we can do that is by leveraging our networks. Now, Governor Emil highlighted how municipalities are suffering, and their needs can differ depending on their challenges. And in fact, even between a rural and an urban area, there can be distinct differences. Yet he also highlighted the need to design for something that we've also been talking about in Global Resilient Cities Network, which is to respond to the COVID-19 crisis really in three phases. We have to look at what we're doing in terms of response. Then we have to look at recovery. And while we're doing that, in parallel, we have to plan for a new normal. We've learned over 6 years of working together with our network that cities are much more alike than they are different. And it is because of these commonalities that they can share knowledge and they can really do work at the speed that is required despite constraints in capacity. Now, Kanni offered some excellent insights as well. And one of those was that systems have been dismantled at an alarming rate, and it will take us a long time to rebuild them. And while I agree with that, I also want to offer that optimist's view that, in fact, many of our systems were quite broken, and we do have this opportunity, perhaps once in a lifetime opportunity, to build back more equitable, safe, and climate-ready cities if we are using common frameworks like urban resilience and if we work with our cities on the front lines to channel solutions. So COVID-19 has made it absolutely impossible to ignore the trends that we've already seen. We are facing these unprecedented challenges that combine climate change, pollution, inequality, pandemics, and they're all global now. Cities are uniquely poised to confront these crises, but they need a new way to organize for and confront our biggest problems. So in that vein, urban resilience is really key. When a city looks at all its needs and actions as connected, they can strengthen the fabric of the city with every action, from building a road to organizing COVID assistance to build back better and better prepared for the future. So we partner with cities and help them develop these powerful solutions and projects that have a bigger impact and address multiple needs and benefit the most vulnerable. So this work requires tremendous innovation on the part of cities. They have to rethink who a city is and adapt how they view the connection and interdependency of their different communities and functions. I want to give an example of this kind of work where you can take a systemic approach and build back better than where you started. So Quito in Ecuador, they have taken an approach to food security that is a very compelling example. Quito is geographically isolated. One bad seismic event could cut off food to the city. This is probably a shock that many in this region, whether in New Zealand or in Indonesia, can relate to. The resilience team in Quito did a very careful analysis of their food system. And the resilience team there saw that they could address multiple needs via food: better health, income generating activities, and reducing food insecurity. They spent months working to make this a city government priority, with learning sessions from across our network with New York, with Paris, and with New Orleans. And eventually they succeeded in making this one of the central mechanisms of their resilience strategy. And the city government has oriented its plans around the food system. They encourage small-scale urban farms, including 200 new farms in the past year, training these farmers about organic practices and how to farm smarter. And they collaborated with local food industry players to foster a network of farmers markets to speed distribution and to increase access in food swamps. So when COVID-19 hit, they already had the mechanisms in place to provide healthy food to the neediest. And they fed over 400 families a week. In many neighborhoods, urban farms were directly supplying to their neighborhoods. So they didn't have to take long, risky trips to faraway markets. Now, we take this back to our network and focus a step further by centering cities in our leadership to increase the potential for collective action. So Resilient Cities Network is governed by cities, and we empower them to deploy these solutions and scale lessons for impact. We've spent the past year listening to our network of over 97 cities tell us what they need. And we reviewed 4,000 different resilience projects to look at the areas of greatest demand from cities for solutions. So we could figure out what was that heat map? What were the solution areas? What were the technologies that were necessary so we could replicate them in multiple cities? And partners, private sector, civil society, play a very critical role in the scaling effect. And I want to talk to another example that really comes to the compounding crisis around climate, around sustainability in our cities and neighborhoods. So Rotterdam in the Netherlands, which some of you may be familiar with, major port city, has a huge flooding problem. They have built multiple water squares over the past decades in previously gray neighborhoods. In a series of 3 basins, they created capture areas so that in times of flooding, they could fill with water and prevent generalized flooding around the city. And so when it's dry, they can also use these places as a raised theater area, as skate parks for sports, and having a whole area that's landscape for community development. And now, during COVID's time, this is incredibly important because it can create increased outdoor spaces for businesses and economic activity. Now, through our network, Surat in India and Paris in France both borrowed this idea and have created multifunctional public plazas as spaces for community recreational opportunities and ceremonial activities. So we have temples that are dedicated to Ganesha in times of normality, and then in flooding, they become these flood plazas. Now, we are a network of urban doers, and I want to close by really calling this group and those on the call to action. City-led partnership is critical, and our network is comprised of hundreds of experts who are working on solving these problems, bringing together unparalleled global urban resilience knowledge, practice, and partnerships to find the right solutions at the right times for our most pressing challenges. And so I'm really looking forward to the continued conversation with the other speakers and with this group, because there is a lot that we have to do, but together we can build back better. Thank you, James.
Very good. Okay, thank you to all three of you. Those are three great perspectives with which to begin. So I think what I'd like to do, given that we are at the Festival of Innovation, obviously we want to talk about innovations and examples of innovations. But before we do that, I want to sort of set the ground with a realistic assessment of how things are from each of your perspectives. In a sense, before the pandemic began, all three of you in your own way were trying to push forward with policies for a greener and more sustainable world. And my sense is that a lot of that has become much more difficult, although Lauren's point about the opportunity for future innovation is well taken. So maybe Lauren, can I sort of start with you? What are you hearing from your city's network about how much more difficult their task has become in the aftermath of the pandemic, and maybe tell us a little bit more about what you've heard from the projects that they were thinking about, or their priorities in the aftermath of the pandemic, and then I'll ask the same thing to Emil and Kanni.
Thanks, James. It's a great question. Cities the world over have one primary concern, which is how can we respond quickly enough with less, right? All of our cities, all of our countries are stressed because revenues are shrinking. And so there is a pressure to really look carefully at budgets and be laser focused on how we direct our spending. And I think, Emil gave some very pointed examples of how in East Java, you have been careful to design at different times for different kinds of relief for your citizens. And that's very common. What we're hearing from our cities is we need to prioritize this integration of response and basic services with building infrastructure and social services that are future ready. And if you look at the examples of what we've experienced this summer, we have seen massive flooding and typhoons in some places, and then incredible heat waves, registering temperatures that are skyrocketing in others. And these two kinds of phenomena give us the example of what we're hearing from our city network, which is we need to design these types of infrastructure, stormwater, water and sanitation services. Those are a huge priority, in particular in our emerging cities, so that we can have adequate places to wash our hands. Right? Who knew that one of the biggest questions we'd be asking ourselves in 2020 was, do you have a safe place to wash your hands? This is absolutely critical in our emerging cities. And all over the world, as we prepare, cities are looking at their stormwater systems, their waste management systems to ensure that they are going to be able to have capacity to deal with increasing precipitation. And in our cities worldwide, and we are a proud member of the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance, along with our partners at the Atlantic Council and the Red Cross are on this, cities are really worried about how you keep citizens safe as temperatures rise and you cannot have as many people indoors in cooling centers. So how do you adapt the city and develop warning systems and infrastructure that can be responsive to the current challenge and those that we're going to be facing in the future?
Just one other quick follow-up, Lauren. So you said in your presentation you said response, recovery, and then building a new normal. When you're talking to your city members, where are we now? Are we still in response, or are we now in the kind of place where urban leaders are beginning to plan for this new recovery? Or in a sense, have we not quite reached that? Is it still all hands on deck, trying to flatten the curve, as Emil said. And I'll turn to Emil for a response on this in a minute too.
It's a great question, James, and there's no one answer. Cities are actually, in most cases, dealing with those three phases that I mentioned: response, recovery, and planning a new normal in parallel. So if we are talking to members of our city network who are in Wellington or Christchurch, right, they are in a response and a new normal building mode because of the early action that they were able to take quite successfully. Whereas, as Emil was saying, there are still rising cases in Indonesia, in India, in my home country, in the States. There is still a lot of uncertainty about what the next few months looks like. So city leaders don't have the luxury of choosing. In fact, I think all of our government leaders and our city leaders who are on the front lines are forced to do these tasks simultaneously. And that's where the network can become very useful, because those cities who have less of an urgency and response, who have outlined how to approach these resilient recovery issues, are able to share those practices across the network directly with their colleagues. And we have seen that over 80% of our chief resilience officers, who are the ones who are leading resilience action in our city members, over 80% of them are involved in the response and recovery efforts. So they're well placed to share with each other policies that are happening in real time and help each other to deal with those three phases.
Very good. Emil, can I put the same question to you? Again, I'm keen that we hear, in a sense, how challenging is this on the ground? So you outlined in your presentation the steps that you've been taking, but prior to COVID, I imagine that East Java had all sorts of plans for sustainability, energy renewal, combating climate change. How difficult has it been to keep these on track? And in a sense, what is the reality of the situation that you're now facing on that front?
Well, I think, of course, the pandemic has, first of all, shifted our attention. Second, shifted our resources towards battling the spread of the virus. And we have to admit that some of the groundwork for these efforts to promote sustainability and renewable energy may have suffered from a bit of a setback, but I don't think it's a massive setback because, for example, we were working on flood mitigation measures, as well as we also look into addressing quality of river water discharges from factories. We're not actually taking any step back from those agenda right now. We're still committed to ensuring that we have a facility to manage industrial waste in order to minimize the risk of factories actually discharging these industrial waste in an improper manner. So I think we do, when it comes to investments in private investments, there will be an issue because I think a lot of investors are on a wait and see mode. But when it comes to government involvements in mitigating flood, we realize that keeping government spending as well in other sectors would also be important. But we try to, for example, really eliminate some areas that some areas may suffer, certain areas, certain sectors in the government spending. For example, of course, government try to promote some activities. Maybe I have to admit, probably some of the sectors that suffer the most would be in tourism, maybe in culture, creative economy, but things that are really touching the grassroots, such as improving roads and then managing the rivers, we still proceed with that because on a scale of priority, these are in line with mitigating disaster, and that is very important because at times when the economy results in vulnerability, I think disaster impact will be escalated. So we need to take a proactive approach in managing these agenda.
Very good. Okay, no, that's I mean, in a sense, what we're talking about here this morning is the importance of innovation in a situation where the circumstances demand it, and money perhaps is less plentiful than it was before. So this is the perfect environment for innovation. Kanni, can I ask you just the same question, really? I mean, from your point of view, you said at the beginning, and quite chastening, many of the hard-won development goals that your organization and others have championed and helped to bring about are in a sense reversing. But what do you see? How challenging are the circumstances on the ground? Just so we understand, and then let's talk about, in a sense, the optimism and innovations that you see after that. So how bad is it out there?
Well, it's the glass half empty or the glass half full, right? So I think let me say that for years we've been saying that the health budget of countries should be in the double digits. That this shouldn't be seen as a cost; it should be seen as an investment. Because if you don't, a country that doesn't invest in its people and put people's health first and their knowledge first, no matter how good your infrastructure is, you're just not going to be moving as fast as everyone else. And so you've seen countries that had kept their health budgets at 1.5, 2, maybe 3%, now looking to double it and really rapidly ratcheting that up. Now, part of that is because of the emergency measures on PPEs, etc. But what I'm hoping, so the glass half full, is that we're seeing that some of these investments are actually there to stay. And what Emil said, you're seeing the shift in budget priorities happening. That's one. The second is this completely inextricable link between people's lives and the environment, the natural environment we live in, right? And the fact that we have not invested in protecting, managing that environment, whether these are in ecologically fragile zones, in biodiverse areas that we have destroyed, our water resources from, as Lauren said, from rivers to forests. This is the damage that we have caused, and the fact that we haven't actually put back everything we've taken is showing the jump, right? I mean, this virus could have been avoided, and a lot of coronaviruses can be avoided if we hadn't destroyed the natural habitats, and climate change is devastating this. So now we're seeing the interest in putting back some of these. Now, what it is going to mean in the short term, including in the move to renewables, and we're seeing this. Indonesia is doing an amazing job in investing more in hydro, in solar, etc. Is in the short term, there is a carrying cost. There's going to be stranded assets. We have gotten used to these fossil fuel-based and fueled economies, which gave us the fast growth, but at a heavy cost, and not just a cost on pollution, and then we say, well, we'll clean that up later. That has been the model of fast growth in almost all parts of Asia. But there's another heavy cost, which is growing inequalities and injustices come with that type of push. And now we're seeing a halt, and the fact that we're looking much more at saying what is going on locally here. How can we help the people, large numbers of people, just falling off the edge? And again, Emil's point that they're looking at how to bridge with a basic income, with credits, to keep people alive. And these are not even people who got affected immediately by the virus, but these are people who will otherwise starve. And so that change in what actually makes for a prosperous society and economy, I think, is shifting. And my last point maybe here is this issue of money. We keep saying there's not enough money. There's a whole lot of money out there. It's not a matter of fiscal space. I strongly believe that. It's a matter of political fiscal choice. And that is where the right choices on where to invest, not just in this emergency kind of period, but putting in a very different way of developing for a much more sustainable way moving forward that puts both people and their environment ahead of everything else, is also showing a return that I think private investment is also going to follow. But public policy and public investment will flag that, and then you'll see the rest coming behind. Back to you, James.
Very good. Okay. Well put. So I want to use the remaining 10 minutes that we have to give our audience a sense of reasons for optimism, to highlight some examples of innovations that we see around the region or good practices. So Kanni, let's stay with you. I mean, one thing that it occurs for me to ask about is you've looked at the recovery and stimulus efforts in the aftermath of COVID. And so I wondered if you might kind of pick some best practices from there, or if not, just give us a few examples that you've seen of countries or cities or regions that in a sense have taken a particularly enlightened or forward-looking approach to sustainability in the last 6 months when they've been coping with COVID. And then I'll ask Emil and Lauren to fish out some good optimistic examples of their own.
Well, let me pick 3 or 4 very optimistic trends that we're seeing. One is, in our region, the majority of people, so I'm talking 70-80% of people, are not covered by a robust or sustained social protection system. And as we heard from Emil, countries are putting this in now. And I hope that this isn't just a bridging mechanism, that this truly looks at the fact that we could be hit by all kinds of shocks, not just a virus, but by climate shocks. A natural disaster is a good one. And that there'll be a good enough, robust system, whether we call that a social safety net, whether we call that a basic income, SME credits, employment guarantees, that this is something that becomes part and parcel of an economic and social package that we offer. That's one. Second, we are really seeing the fact that we are creating more jobs and healthier jobs for young people in the renewable sector. So there is a double win there, which is that it's less polluting going forward, particularly in our big cities, and Lauren's network would be very, very aware of this, that the new jobs for young people need to come in areas that are not the old industry, not the old practices. So even in the digital economy, we're seeing a new set of skills emerging that allows people to move forward, and that investment happening in our region increasingly. And maybe the last point is, I would say, if one had just $1 extra, the question is, where would you put it? Or 1 rupee, right? If you had 1 extra rupee, where would you put it? And I would say in a kid's education. That to me is where we're seeing also there was a growing trend and then it's plateaued. And now we're seeing countries that have managed to hold that education trend and move people's education, but particularly children's education. And remember, children's education is so closely related to children's and women's nutrition. These investments really moving forward. So I think, James, there's no going back from this. And I too am an optimist. I'm not a millennial, but I'm an optimist. And I think we're on a track that we just cannot head back. Politically, we cannot head back. And we've got good examples and good leaders out there showing how it's getting done.
Well, I'm not a millennial either, so we representatives of the former and declining generation will look to the younger generation to give us some fresh ideas. So Emil, you told us a little bit about some of the projects that you were sticking to even in these difficult times, but perhaps give us a sense of things you're seeing on the ground, innovations either in East Java or elsewhere that you've seen that you think offer possibilities for how you can continue to move forward on sustainability and climate issues, even in a difficult pandemic situation?
Yeah, I think we need to be very specific in our local context on what are the key climate change risks that took place. I think first of all is usually the fossil fuel consumption that needs to be reduced. Now, we are in line with the central government's priority to actually promote biodiesel. Although, of course, there's also another side to it, because biodiesel, some people also see other side, but it's still not fossil fuel. So it's one step better. But of course, we are also looking forward towards electric vehicles, for example. But I think the pandemic is starting to allow us to question what are the essential mobility that we need actually, and that kind of help reduce our ecological footprint. So there is a forced ecological footprint reduction that took place because of the pandemic, and at the same time we try to maintain productivity by virtue of digital platforms, and we're seeing that this COVID-19 allows us, especially on the political space, it is usually a luxury to be talking about digitization. People always say that digital is the agenda of the haves, of the rich, and when you talk about the poor, let's not talk about digital first, let's talk about the basic necessities. But now those two are part of the two sides of the same coin. I mean, I think we cannot actually address issues of feeding the poor if we don't address digitization. I think the kids in the rural areas, in the most isolated parts of the area, cannot go to school, and we need to talk about how they can access internet, how they have the gadget that they need. So innovations are abundant right now because there's a lot of problems that need to be solved. I cannot list all of them one by one, but we're seeing that public institutions began streamlining and reducing bureaucratic measures in processing licenses and servicing the communities because of the pandemic. So there is a situation that forces us to accelerate the making it less bureaucratic, if you call it debureaucratization. So that's the key. And again, I like to say, because there are more problems to solve, there will be more solutions to accelerate. And I think the political environment that that determines what kind of public policy making we do are actually now hungry for digital solutions, for innovations. And we are still proceeding with our plan to do a launchpad for a cloud computing based public sector solutions in one of the special economic zone in East Java. So we would like to have all 38 municipalities, more than 8,000 local rural governments to also start learning and embarking more on cloud computing solutions, so that they can try to test out more digital innovations. One last thing, I hope I don't want you. In the marketplace, where there's a lot of interaction when people shop, we install CCTV using artificial intelligence to detect whether people are observing the use of mask or not. And that's one of the way that we try to achieve more with less, because people cannot go out too much. So we need to rely on technology to do that.
Very good. Okay, thanks. So I promised everyone we'd finish at 10 o'clock local time. So Lauren, last word to you. Do you, in the last minute or minute and a half we have, do you want to give us a few examples? You mentioned Ecuador and Rotterdam. Do you have any from this region or elsewhere that you'd like to highlight from your city's network?
James, I have plenty of examples, but respecting time and also building on the very specific examples that Kanni and Emil gave, I would say this: there is tremendous opportunity to build more sustainable solutions, right, that focus on renewables, education, technology. But the actual objective of the game is not to do these in silos. Right? We have the resources, and so designing the kinds of projects that deliver multiple benefits to citizens is really essential. And there are phenomenal examples the world over. In fact, I think it can become overwhelming when we try to list them out individually. So I think what is incredibly exciting about the next steps that we're taking with our network is to actually categorize these types of successful examples that respond to these challenges and maximize value. We find that cities who are designing these resilience projects for multiple benefits are getting at least 3x value on the dollar for their investments. So I would say you have to design for multiple benefits and use networks and sharing so that you're not reinventing the wheel. Different governments have very similar challenges in similar types of cities and contexts. And so we've started a community online. It's called Cities for Resilient Recovery. It has communities of practice that share specific examples within different kinds of challenge areas to solve problems. And so I would say that we have a real opportunity to speed the response and share solutions through these networks so that we can really help citizens to recover and get to a more equitable and safer situation in our future cities.
Very good. Thank you for that. That's an excellent point on which to close. And I want to thank all three of my speakers, Kanni from the UNDP, Emil joining us from East Java, and Lauren here representing the home team in Singapore. This is not the end of our discussion about innovation, however, as part of GovInsider's Festival of Innovation. The next session, which is coming on immediately after this, is going to be chaired by Amit Choudhury, who's a columnist for GovInsider and is going to look again at resilience and innovation. So I will hand over to him, and all that it remains for me to do is to give one more vote of thanks to my speakers and to say thank you very much for joining us here today. Many thanks to you all, and see you again soon.
Thank you, James.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you.
Hello. Welcome to this session. After last session, which was very interesting, we are talking about innovation and resilience. Both these words have acquired a greater meaning because of the current pandemic situation. And we will try to see in this 1 hour how both can coexist with each other. And without further ado, I will like to ask the Honorable Minister for Communication and Information of Indonesia, Johnny Plate, to start his presentation. Thank you. And sir, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so delighted to be here to give my insight into GovInsider Live Festival of Innovations. I hope our session today will be fruitful for us to find the best way to enhance the digital resiliency in our respective countries. Accelerating the digital transformation agenda has been one of Indonesia's core policy pillars. A robust digital ecosystem is needed to realize the 2045 visions of Indonesia Maju, or Advanced Indonesia, where Indonesia is projected to be one of the top 5 world economic giants with a total gross domestic product of $7 trillion. In an era where being digital is inevitable, a holistic digital transformations approach that ranges from infrastructure development to digital capacity improvement is necessary further to enhance the digital resilience of the Indonesia society. In today's presentation, I will first outline the national digital transformations of Indonesia and explain further how the digital transformations accelerations will help Indonesia becoming a more resilient nation in the future. The recent development of the pandemic has given rise to online activities. Indonesia has never been in the position like nowadays, where the digital technology is urgently needed more than ever to support the people's daily life, as well as fostering the national revitalizations and recovery in many various sectors. Despite all challenges that have risen, the government of Indonesia believes that the pandemic has also opened the opportunities to accelerate the national digital transformations agenda further. However, to create a strong basis for the digital ecosystem to prosper. Earlier in August, President Joko Widodo has given the national directives on digital transformations accelerations President Jokowi believes Indonesia must seize the moment to increase the digital resiliency and capacity by expediting the digital transformation process. The Ministry of Communication and Information Technology will be the leading institutions in the digital transformation agenda. These directives are translated to become the ministry policies priorities for in 5 main sectors. Those are: 1. Accelerating the expansions of internet access and improving the digital infrastructure. Second, designing roadmaps on digital transformation on strategic sectors. The third, expediting the integrations of data and establishments of the National Data Center. Fourth, preparing human resources development in the digital sector. And the fifth, completing any necessary regulations and financing schemes to support the digital transformation process. To become a resilient digital nation, Indonesia also catered to the adoptions of the new technologies, the improvement of digital talent, and the adequate regulations, along with the massive infrastructure development. Indonesia envisions establishing the National Data Center to realize national data integrations. Indonesia is also committed to enhance the service and experience qualities of the telecommunications users and aims to build a national telecommunications monitor center soon. Moreover, the ministry is currently doing the frequency reallocations through frequency farming and refarming, as well as preparing the 5G network development. As with the digital talent improvement, the ministry has already initiated several significant training stimuli to increase the nation's digital capacity through programs such as the National Digital Literacy Movement Cybercreasi, the Digital Talent Scholarship, and the Digital Leadership Academy. We also put our attention in talent development in the digital economy through initiatives such as MSMEs Go Online, 1,000 National Startup Movement, and many more. Indonesia also committed to expediting the process of several primary legislation, namely personal data protection regulations. On top of that, we also aim to broaden our international collaborations, data flow, and digital economy enhancement. Resilient digital society is not only invisible of technical aspects of cybersecurity threats. It must possess an excellent skill in responding to the various non-technical cybersecurity threats, such as scam, phishing, as well as hoax and disinformations. These are considered as the most significant threats of the moment. In responding to such threats, the government of Indonesia initiated out a 3-layer strategy in tackling hoax and misinformation divided as follows. Upstreams, the ministry works together with the local communities, academicians, civil societies, media, and the private sector to massively conduct campaigns, educational classes, and training on digital literacy through the National Movement of Digital Literacy, Cybercreasi, as earlier mentioned. Digital literacy improvement is one of the foremost foundations and a sustainable solutions to build a resilient society against the fake news and misinformations. Just yesterday, Cybercreasi has the honor to receive the title of World Summit on Information Society, WSIS Prizes 2020 winner for its contribution to enhancing the digital capacity and literacy in Indonesia. In the middle stream, the ministry actively monitors and takes necessary actions upon the circulations of harmful content on the internet. To give some examples, since the early development of the pandemic, the ministry monitors the daily circulations of COVID-related hoaxes in social media. Since January until today, there are 1,093, nearly 1,100 disinformation issues and 1,920 hoaxes containing posts from 4 main social media in Indonesia: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and Infodemic, of course. The ministry supports law enforcement by escalating cases of the spreading of fake news to be processed by the Criminal Investigation Agency of the Indonesian National Police. To anticipate the propagations of fake news during the 2020 simultaneous regional elections, we call it Pilkada Serentak 2020. The ministry will collaborate with the Indonesian National Police, General Election Commissions, and Election Supervisory Agency. Ladies and gentlemen, building cyber resilience across the nation should not only the interest of solely the government. It is our collective goal to educate, encourage, and spread awareness to ensure a better understanding of today's emerging cyber threats in our society. Therefore, I humbly encourage my colleagues to present here to share their knowledge and best practices in tackling the cyber threats in their respective countries, as well as to work together to build and transform ourselves into a positive and productive digital society. I'm very sorry this morning I cannot take questions and answers since I have another meeting sessions and I have to attend, which I have to attend. But bear in mind that I always love to answer all questions sending to me, and I will come back and answer in writing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister, for a wonderful presentation. And it was very informative. And I fully understand that thanks to your busy schedule, you will not be able to stay with us. But it was wonderful having you. And please do illuminate us and about the various initiatives that Indonesia is taking in the domain of cybersecurity. Have a wonderful day, sir.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye. Okay, now after that wonderful presentation by the Minister of Communications and Information in Indonesia, may I invite Gwenda Fong, who's Assistant Chief Executive of the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore, to give her presentation. Thank you, Gwenda. Over to you.
Thank you, Amit. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good day to you. I'm pleased to join you at GovInsider Live today. I would like to thank GovInsider for organizing this discussion. The topic of building digital innovation and resilience is indeed a timely one, especially with the backdrop of the global pandemic, the increasing use of work from home, and the broader secular trend of increased digitalization. Before I go into my remarks proper, perhaps I could give a very brief introduction and overview of my organization. The Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore, or CSA, was formed in 2015 and is the central agency tasked to protect Singapore's cyberspace. Our core mission is to keep Singapore's cyberspace safe and secure, to underpin our national security, to power a digital economy, and to protect our digital way of life.
Gwenda, can I just interrupt you for a second?
Yes.
Your camera is going behind your screen, I think, so we can't see your full face. So can you just move your camera just a bit so that we can see you while you're presenting?
Is this okay now?
Yeah, it's fine now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as alluded
Thank
to
you.
in our core mission, cybersecurity is not an end in itself, but it provides a foundation to enable a digital society. As Singapore harnesses technology to improve lives and livelihoods for all, it is important to ensure that these technologies are secure. Otherwise, we would be exposing ourselves to a multitude of threats that lurk in cyberspace. The need to keep our cyberspace safe and secure becomes more pressing as more aspects of our lives move online and more of our devices are connected to the web. This can result in a wider attack surface that can be exploited by the malicious actors. Often, we are unaware of the vulnerabilities in our systems as they become more interconnected and complex. For example, an internet-connected fish tank in a North American casino was used as an access point for hackers, which were eventually able to exfiltrate data from the organization. Securing our systems is made no easy as malicious adversaries continue to evolve and adapt to the changing technology environment. Recently, we have seen the proliferation of ransomware with a significant number of high-profile hits across multiple sectors. This has been driven by the rise of the ransomware for a service business model. In this model, a group of developers oversee the maintaining of the ransomware code, while another group is responsible for spreading the ransomware. New business models and modes of attack will continue to surface, and the onus lies with governments, industry, and users to prepare themselves to defend against hackers. My point on the changing threat landscape is not to be alarmist, but to illustrate that the cyber domain is incredibly dynamic. To prepare to defend ourselves against these threats and to build a trusted and secure cyberspace, Singapore launched our national cybersecurity strategy in 2016. The strategy is built on 4 pillars. First, we want to build a resilient infrastructure. Second, we want to create a safer cyberspace. Third, we want to develop a vibrant cybersecurity ecosystem. And last but not least, we wanted to strengthen our international partnerships. The first pillar on building a resilient infrastructure is focused on strengthening the protection of our critical information infrastructure, or CIIs for short. CIIs play a critical role in the delivery of essential services to our country, such as telecommunications, power, water, and banking and finance. While the physical protection of such infrastructure will always be indispensable, cyber defense plays an equally important role. There have been reports of critical infrastructure such as power grids, water systems, and telco networks overseas that have been targeted in cyber attacks. To ensure that our essential services remain resilient to cyber attacks, the Cybersecurity Act was passed in 2018 to govern the protection of CIIs, and CSA works very closely with the CII operators to ensure the security of these systems. While our efforts have been focused on CIIs, there is increasing urgency to further strengthen the security of our wider cyberspace. To that end, Singapore will soon be launching the Safer Cyberspace Master Plan, which will describe how we intend to work with businesses, academia, and the general public to improve their cybersecurity. Protecting our cyberspace is not and will never be easy, and 2 aspects stand out that make the challenge of cyber defense unique and, in my opinion, exciting. First, the cyber landscape is extremely dynamic due to not only the furious pace of the change of technology, but also the cunning of malicious actors who are persistent and sophisticated. Secondly, the cyber domain is transnational. Malicious actors can operate anonymously from anywhere in the world, and there are no clear rules of engagement in the cyber domain. In Singapore, we work to overcome these challenges by driving innovation with academia and industry stakeholders, and by working together with international partners. Let me elaborate. First, as the agency in charge of protecting Singapore's digital domain, CSA must have innovation in our lifeblood. The government alone will not be able to provide all the answers, and it is essential, as the minister played before me also said, that we need to work together with academia and industry to nurture a thriving innovation ecosystem that can avail novel and useful cybersecurity solutions for government and the wider economy. At the foundation of innovation is basic research, and CSA is committed to growing our national capacity for cyber research and development. Since 2013, we have invested about 190 million Singapore dollars through the National Cybersecurity R&D program. We also welcome the best ideas and expertise to Singapore, and the NCR is open to international projects too. We have in fact conducted joint research calls with international partners such as the UK, and we invite researchers to reach out to explore how we can work together. To support the translation of knowledge into solutions, we have also put in place the Cybersecurity Call for Innovation. This initiative aims to connect sophisticated end users who may have very unique and complex cybersecurity problems that they face with industry stakeholders in order to catalyze innovation. In 2019, we issued 14 such challenge statements and 9 projects were eventually awarded. We will continue to explore ways to further build a vibrant cyber research and development sector, and we welcome partners to work with us to turn budding ideas into reality. Allow me now to talk a little bit about partnerships. Cyber threats are global in nature, and no single government can deal with the issues alone. The transboundary nature of cyber issues requires some universalization or international consensus to support coherence and coordination. This will help to build predictable modes of behavior in cyberspace. Singapore participates actively in international and regional discussions to support a rules-based international order in cyberspace. At the international stage, we participate in UN discussions at the UN Group of Government Experts and the Open-Ended Working Group to develop and implement the rules and norms for a peaceful, secure, and resilient cyberspace. In our cybersecurity discussions within ASEAN, we work together to strengthen regional policy coordination on cybersecurity issues of key importance to the region, as well as collaborate on cybersecurity capacity building of ASEAN member states, and we implement the norms and confidence building measures agreed upon at UN platforms. These international and regional discussions help to create clear rules of the road that are essential to the effective functioning of the digital economy. Singapore is committed to ensuring that such important discussions continue, pandemic or otherwise. To that end, we will continue to host the annual Singapore International Cyber Week, where we convene leaders across governments, industry, and academia to push forward pertinent discussions on cybersecurity. The Singapore International Cyber Week this year will be held virtually, and this offers the opportunity for participants to dial in from anywhere in the world. The event will be on the 5th to 8th of October, and I welcome you to join us for a week of exciting conversations with a distinguished lineup of speakers. Moving forward, the safety and security of the digital domain depends on all of us, governments, academia, industry, and users. We each must play our part, and we can build a safer cyberspace for all and unlock the full potential of our digital future. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to our discussion later. Back to you, Amit.
Thank you, Gwenda, for a wonderful presentation, and do stay around for a quick conversation we'll have after the end of the other presentations. Now I'll ask Dato, Dr. Amirudin Abdul Wahab, the CEO of Cybersecurity Malaysia, to give his views on the subject. Dato, over to you.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you also to GovInsider for inviting me to share our perspective with regards to cyber resiliency in context of a nation. Okay, let me change the slide. Sorry. If you look at the current global cyber landscape nowadays, it has evolved tremendously. And you can see it's no longer just about people-to-people connectivity, not just about internet, not just about social media, cloud computing or mobile devices, but it has cut across all sectors. And in fact, it becomes a norm now, where we'll see that it is in fintech, for example, in financial sector, even in transportation sector, etc. So we'll have all these new emerging trends of technologies like blockchain, AI, etc. So these emerging technologies actually impacted everyone. And with as we all know, the rise of COVID-19 recently, with more connectivity of the people and everything, not just work, not just communicating online, but also work online, etc. You can see the rise of cyber threat happening globally. And this is not just happening in our country, but globally, and in context of our country in Malaysia. We can see the increase of threats such as hacking or intrusion, harassment, etc. And the cases that we receive at Cybersecurity Malaysia through our Cyber 999 Help Center increases and rise by 82.85%. That shows how much the increasing threat happening, not only globally, but also in Malaysia. And also with now connectivity that we are having, not just about connectivity of people, but also internet of devices, internet of data and services, etc. We feel that the traditional security approach no longer sufficient to deal with the various smart cyber threats. These emerging technologies actually, as we discussed earlier, introduce emergent threats, and hence our approach should be equally intelligent to address the risk of threat and the potential attack. As you can see, having firewalls, IPS or antivirus, etc., are only effective on known threats, but are useless on unknown threats. And as such, the need to what we call defense in depth, covering a multi-layer of defense from policies and procedures, physical, perimeter, network, all this level, network or a host or application and data. This is the way approach when it comes to be able to be cyber resilient in the context of a nation or even in organizations. At the same time, the approach, even though it is important, being resilient is actually the way forward. Adopting holistic approach it covers all the aspects of people, policy, process, and technology. However, we need also to be able to what we call cyber resilient. That is having the capability or the ability for us to the organization to resist, to respond and recover from threats that will impact the organization, and also the how do we do business. So sometimes people confuse between cybersecurity and also cyber resilience. Roughly, they are very linked to each other, but they focus on different things. When it comes to cybersecurity, it's basically about the action or plan or program that focusing on reducing risk and implementing security approach. However, cyber resiliency is about action, plan, and program upon occurred incidents and what to do next. So it's about the ability to recover quickly from the difficulties, from the attack. It's basically about the toughness. Compared to the cybersecurity, it's about how we ensure that procedures are followed or measures are taken to ensure the safety of our organization. So it's all about ensuring business and operation continuity. Yeah. So it's about we have a proactive security measures put in place to reduce the risk of cyber attacks and protect the organization. However, at the same time, the need to what we call embed and integrate all the programs of cybersecurity into the wider business objective, and at the same time to ensure the resiliency of this program. That means not only be able to respond, the need to what we call to ensure the business continuity plan is there. At the same time, then we have to have a disaster recovery plan to ensure sustainability of the business and organization. In that sense, there is a need to approach what we call adaptive security. That means to be more proactive, dynamic, and integrated when it comes to approaching cybersecurity. And that is of 4 areas of not only being responsive, but also be able to look from the aspects of preventive, detective, and predictive. And this combination of these 4 elements is a way for us to approach what I call this, in summary, this adaptive security. Yeah? Adaptive security is actually an approach to cybersecurity that analyze behaviors and events and to protect against and adapt to threats before they happen. And when with adaptive security architecture, an organization can continuously assess risk and automatically provide proportional enforcement that can be dialed up or down. So in the context of cybersecurity, we in cybersecurity in Malaysia, we have developed and provide various services across cybersecurity domain and life cycle, from the aspects of predict, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, and review. This is also in accordance to the NIST framework. And these are the various list of proactive and responsive services that includes also the aspects of we call it the predictive and detective capabilities. We have cyber threat intelligence. We have CIMA initiative, which is called Coordinated Malware Eradication and Remediation. And we have various type of other proactive and responsive services, at the same time covering the aspects of people, policy, process, and technologies. We believe that to move forward in this era, to be resilience and innovation, there is a need to ensure for a secure, resilient, and trusted cyber environment in order to sustain the progression and prosperity. In this regard, also a more innovative and proactive adaptive security approach is required to address such situation. And when we talk about adaptive security, it encompasses the 4 components I mentioned earlier: predictive, detective, responsive, and corrective capabilities. In addition, our approach also has to be adaptive, dynamic, and innovative. It has to cover people, the process, which include policy, insight, and also the technology. One thing also about cybersecurity, you cannot work alone. No entity, no one can do alone. That's why it is the importance of collaboration, strengthening public-private academia partnership and international collaboration, and also being prepared is the key to prevent biggest cybersecurity problem. With that, I end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dato, for a wonderful presentation. Now I'll quickly hand over the stage to Sam O'Brien, RSA's Integrated Risk Management Leader for the Asia Pacific region, for his presentation. And then we'll go into a quick discussion phase. Sam, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Amit. Just want to check, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you can hear you fine.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So first and foremost, ladies and gentlemen, I sincerely hope that you're all safe and well, as well as your teams and families. And I'd also like to acknowledge the tremendous work that many of the organisations represented in this forum and speaking in this forum today, especially those delivering frontline services, are providing to their citizens, their nations, and of course to each other. Thanks also to GovInsider for the opportunity to share with you some insights from RSA's perspective today. What we hope you take away from this is really looking at digital innovation and resilience more from a risk perspective. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic continues to evolve and impact people's lives in many different ways, and I'm assuming that this will be the case for some time to come. While the situation plays out, I often wonder how we would have dealt with this as a society with an event like this 50, 20, or even 10 years ago. Imagine trying to navigate the circumstances that we see ourselves face without things like smartphones, without services like Grab, or without things like VPNs and Zoom, so that many of us can keep working and living largely from home and the safety that that affords. I think it would have been significantly worse. And while there is still a digital divide for many nations to conquer, digital innovation has clearly made a difference to the way that society has been able to respond. And I truly believe that digital innovation and resilience are inherently linked and are incredibly important initiatives to continue to encourage and enable. But first, where did this particular trend start? Now, digital transformation and digital innovation are not new concepts. Many organizations, both commercial enterprises and government, have actually been building apps and moving to the cloud and enabling their dynamic workforces for some time, but they're proving to be extra valuable given the situation we're in right now. Thinking about the adopters of this over time, we have our early adopters. In many cases, the early adopters of digital innovation were looking at enabling things that would be faster, cheaper, better for their customers, better for their citizens. And ultimately, by doing that, they were differentiating their services and innovating. Look at the likes of Uber and Grab and the impact that they have had in the regions that they've opened up in. In many cases, the value proposition was radically improving customer experience. And the fact that they were cheaper was actually a secondary benefit. But that allowed companies like that to innovate and differentiate themselves. You don't have the second stage of digital innovation adoption, which are the late adopters. So those that are looking at unlocking some of those same benefits, so doing things faster, cheaper, maybe not better, maybe just as good as the competition, because really they're just trying at this point to stay up. And you look at some of the taxi companies, for example, around the region that have launched apps to make the booking process and other things like that a little bit easier, but in some cases it's been too little too late. Right, so we've seen this trend continue, and there are many organizations that have not gone all in on digital yet. There's still to do so, but putting that trend aside, what we've all encountered obviously recently is back in February and March, the COVID-19 event. And I think that really created a separation in those that had digitally adopted versus those that had not. For many that had digitally adopted, they found themselves having by default an alternate way of doing business. And I'm talking about enterprises and governments here. So operating in the new normal and being able to deliver services and products to your customers or citizens in a digital fashion actually set you up for keeping the lights on with that alternate way of doing business. And it really enabled many to survive during those first few months of the new normal. And it was absolutely key as well to helping support government initiatives like flattening the curve, because we're able to keep as many people at home as possible. What we're also seeing, though, is that as the trend continues on and we move out of the new normal into whatever the next normal might be, we're now looking at a longer term period where people are going to be working in different ways. And it's not so much that it's an alternate way of working because of changes in societal expectations. And as many of our speakers have highlighted this morning, really embracing and doubling down on those digital efforts. I do believe that the way that people are operating now will actually become the preferred way of doing business, where digital is no longer a nice to have or an enabler of efficiency or just a means of remaining competitive. But digital will now be a fundamental underpinning of business and, of course, of government. And government does have a role to play, not only in providing digital options for citizens to engage, but in setting up the policies to foster innovation, to provide a baseline of resilience for the broader society, and also, speaking from my customer's perspective, to enable the right practices around risk compliance and security initiatives as well, which I'll touch on in just a moment. Now, zooming in on a couple of these areas, this sort of new normal, next normal period that we're in, what I'm seeing across different elements in society, different types of organizations, that there are really changing expectations. So while the pandemic's accelerating change in expectations, preferences across many different groups, I'm just going to focus on three today. So first of all, for society, what we're seeing right now is that many forms of work, many forms of play, and many forms of learning are actually all moving online. And that is enabled by technology, but also enabled by the policies that afford people that option, both for company policies and for national policies as well. But we're also seeing that there's changing expectations from society because of the socially distant mode that we've been operating in. There's this social distancing mindset that's applied where people may not actually prefer to go back to the shops and stores that they were shopping at previously when there is an option to have something purchased over an app and delivered. So there's this apps versus shop fronts mentality that will play out. For organizations, it's about doing fewer things faster and on a digital basis. It's also about enabling the increasingly remote and transient workforces that we'll all be supported by, and designing our products and services and our offerings to our citizens in a way that is customer-centric. So it's not location-centric, it's not functional-centric. It's about actually engaging customers in ways that suit the way that they need to operate and the constraints that we may have at the time because of the pandemic. That also leads to a shift in preferences towards delivering things digitally where possible versus physical. As I said before, obviously to maintain social distancing, we don't want people rushing into to stores en masse to do things or lining up in queues en masse to take advantage of government services. So digital is really, really important. And as we've also seen, that mindset of innovating or else is very, very important for companies to adopt to ensure that they remain relevant and they remain fluid and tactile, given the circumstances that we're operating in. Now, finally, speaking on behalf of a lot of the companies and customers that I engage with, when it comes to risk management, there's also a change in expectation. A lot of risk management organizations are really being tasked with being able to enable their organization to rapidly take on and trade off risk. So, for example, in the early weeks of the crisis, as many organizations were shifting to work from home, there were many that weren't actually supported by the technology they needed to do that, and their business processes weren't designed in a way to enable people working from home, but safety and business continuity took a precedent. So they may have had to make a shift in their risk appetite and their risk profile around areas like cybersecurity, just so that they could keep the lights on and so that they could keep people safe. And that was probably the right thing to do, but that need to be able to shift and trade off very quickly is not going to go away. Organizations are also going to need to address an evolving risk landscape. So we've already seen shifts in cyber attacks, in fraudulent activities. We've seen supply chain disruptions, and I think they will be hallmarks of the way that we operate for the time being, at least. And the final point for risk management is really about enabling resilience by default. And I'm going to elaborate on this a little bit more in my closing slides here. So I posit that while digital innovation initiatives that many organizations have pursued over the last few years were ultimately to deliver benefits, that an unintended benefit of that innovation is in fact resilience. So COVID-19 has highlighted that these two activities, digital innovation and resilience, are in fact inherently linked. things like moving to the cloud, enabling mobility, providing digital engagement channels for customers and citizens were probably not pursued with the intent of building pandemic-resistant business models, but in many cases, they've actually done just that, and I truly hope that that continues. I also believe that this situation has validated the need for society to continue pursuing an aggressive digital strategy. So while digital has made us more resilient, we therefore need to continue being resilient, and to do that, we must continue pursuing digital. So it loops back on itself, and of course, government has a really key role to play in perpetuating that particular cycle. So while I've hopefully made my point that these two particular activities, digital innovation and resilience, are interlinked and that they complement each other, they also don't exist in isolation. They in fact exist as part of a risk universe and an opportunity universe that needs to be considered and managed. That includes things like how we deliver good customer experiences, how we deliver our business and our services securely, how we mitigate fraud, how we maintain a strong reputation. And what I'm seeing is that those risks are all intrinsically linked. But given the rate at which many are having to make decisions in the new or next normal, I'm concerned that the risks aren't actually being adequately considered. And it could be the case that people are playing catch up, or that risk appetites have been relaxed to prioritize one risk area over another. But either way, a balance has to be struck, and we need a way to be able to empower our nations and organizations to be able to consider risks very quickly and accurately, so that we can make decisions as quick as digital innovation and resilience demands us to. Now, I've mentioned a few times that I believe government has a role to play, so I want to elaborate on this a little bit. So there are going to be challenges that still need to be overcome as we move into the next phase of the pandemic, and government will continue needing to be heavily involved. Many organizations are going to need to transition out of a crisis management mindset into more of an operational resilience mindset. And I do acknowledge there are many regulations popping up around the world that support that, which is great to see. We need to be able to empower organizations to embrace their dynamic workforces and populations. We need to be able to innovate and enable resilience by default in doing so. And we also need to enable the management of increasingly dynamic risks. Right? So there are 4 key challenges that we'll start to see pop up more and more. Now, in tackling these challenges, especially digital innovation and resilience, I believe the government needs to lead the way by finding creative ways to deliver high quality experience and continue providing baseline services to citizens in ways that address the needs of the pandemic, but also that cater to long-term societal expectations. And for the broader risk landscape, I also believe that government can play a role in guarding the path. And how do we do that? Well, it's about providing the right examples, by providing the rightly and correctly considered regulations that ensure that those that follow them down this path are able to make good decisions in the context of the risks that they face. So just to close out my session, a couple of questions here as food for thought. So with this in mind, do you think that it's more or less important right now to be assessing risk as part of your digital innovation and resilience agenda? And furthermore, does your organization have the frameworks and systems in place to make those decisions in the context of the risks that you face? And of course, if you'd like to learn more about the capabilities that we as RSA provide to our customers in helping tackle some of these challenges, then we'd love to connect with you. Do feel free to connect with me over LinkedIn, or I'll put some follow-on links in the audience group chat. If you are interested in learning more by way of some recent reports that we've done on how to build resilience in times of disruption, as well as some blogs on the area of operational resilience. Thank you, Amit.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Thanks for a great presentation. We have time for a quick chat on the subjects that we've just discussed. And from what I gather, 2 things: we need resilient networks, and we need innovation. And innovation has helped in developing resilient network. I think that is the sum and substance of all the 4 what all the 4 speakers have shared with us. But my point, and I ask the speakers to talk about that, is that at the moment we are in a peculiar situation, abnormal situation, if you want to call it, with the pandemic. and everything, whether innovation or resilience, is geared towards the pandemic. Now, one of the good side issues is that we've seen that these two work together and we can get a lot of interesting innovation going on. But my question is, how do we sustain this post-pandemic? Can we sustain resiliency of networks along with the innovation required for a digital society? Ben, you want to try and give it a first shot?
Sure, absolutely. So going back to my presentation there, I guess a couple of key points. Look, I really see this as being a necessity, right? So if companies and whether the governments as well are going to continue delivering high quality products and services, then resilience is absolutely key. So I see it as actually something that's non-negotiable. The ones that will progress faster and further are the ones that take it on themselves to put in place good cyber resiliency frameworks, good supply chain resilience frameworks, good operational resilience frameworks. The ones that keep up with the market will be the ones that follow suit with some of the regulations that I'm sure will come in, and that's another one of the roles that government needs to play. In terms of innovation, I mean, it really is a market force, right? So again, if we want to continue operating and driving quality and adopted products and services, they need to be ones that align with needs of customers, and needs of customers are changing very, very rapidly, almost week to week at the moment. So that rapid pace of innovation is key to keep up with this situation.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Let me quickly go to our two government officials here. Gwenda, Singapore is trying to do a lot for resilience and innovation side by side. So my point, like I asked just now, how do you keep the momentum going even after the pandemic is over?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's a good question. And I think in all our experience, we have seen a lot of innovation that has happened in response to COVID. There has been, by some estimates, years of digitalization, acceleration, and transformation that have taken place in a mere matter of weeks or months. So with the innovation, it's not just how we work from home, but how business models have changed. I think the big challenge for businesses and governments to sustain this beyond COVID is for us to basically catch up in terms of the cyber measures and cyber resilience measures that need to be put in place that to make sure that the innovation and the digitalization that has gone on is kept safe. So when businesses emerge from COVID, there could be some temptation to kind of look at how they can cut business costs. And I certainly hope that businesses realize that there is a risk that they have taken in going digital, and that they should be looking, as Sam very neatly put it, they should be looking at how they need to strengthen their cyber posture and to enhance their networks rather than cutting cybersecurity as a cost component. So that's a big mindset shift that needs to happen. People need to see the balance between usability, cost, and the security components in a post-COVID world.
Thanks. Dato, you want to share your thoughts on this point?
Okay. Going back to my earlier presentation, you can see innovation and resilience, especially in the context of cyber, is very much linked. Yeah. As you all know, cyber resilience is about our ability to respond to cyber attack or data breach, to ensure that our business are, continue. It's safeguarded so that it won't be interrupted. But then, whether it's during COVID or even post-COVID, technology keeps changing, and this is where the innovative approach of handling this must be there. And as I highlighted earlier in my presentation, with the approach that in the context of the cyber resiliency is this adaptive security. That means it's not just by being responsive, not just by being putting preventive measures, but we need to strengthen detective and also predictive capabilities together. And this is the way, because we need to adapt to the various technology that is emerging out there. That's no longer just the traditional approach sufficient to handle it, but we need to also equally innovative, equally I would say intelligent in managing these changes. So will be my answer.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Dato. Now, just to follow on that question is, broader context I want the three speakers to think about this is that while we are fully on the same page as far as resilience and innovation, both are required and both are connected to each other, and that this needs to go on post-pandemic. But my point is, how do you inculcate this idea of building resilient networks, and at the same time ensuring innovation keeps on happening in the whole ecosystem? I know right now the governments and the Singapore and Malaysian governments we just heard, as well as the Indonesian government, are doing a yeoman service in building this culture of resilience and innovation. But how do you make it self-sustaining? It cannot at all point of time be a government-led initiative in perpetuity. So, Gwenda, maybe you can share your thoughts on this, because even though Singapore is doing a lot, I mean, I'm talking about the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore in this area, but how do you make it self-sustaining so that every single company, be it a small and medium-sized enterprise to large enterprises, have this built into their DNA?
Thank you for the question. I would answer this along two big points. First, I think it's not sufficient, or it's not good enough just to expect every single end user to know how to take care of themselves, because the truth of the matter is a lot of people don't know what they need to do to protect themselves, be it businesses or individuals. So from the government front, what the approach that we're trying to take is to move cybersecurity further upstream. And what I mean by this is we're trying to work with to see how we can protect our core digital infrastructure, such that in a sense we can provide clean digital services to the end user, rather than requiring every single end user to take very complicated steps to protect themselves. So you can read more about this approach and philosophy in the new Safer Cyberspace Master Plan that I talked about, that we will be releasing in the later part of this year. So that's the first big point about how government, we're trying to move things, the protective measures further upstream. The second point is, as many of my fellow panelists have also said, that cybersecurity is a collective responsibility and we all need to play our part. So there is still a role for end users, including businesses and individuals, to take to protect themselves. So I would break this down in terms of 3 A's in terms of how we help them do this. First is in terms of increasing awareness. If they don't know about cybersecurity, they don't know about cyber threats, they don't know what to do. So that's the first thing. And we do a lot in terms of helping individuals and businesses kind of know about the cyber risk that they face. The second issue is about tackling attitudes. It's much more difficult than awareness, because it's easy to tell people what they need to know. But if people still think that it's not going to happen to me, they take a very laissez-faire approach to it. Part of the challenge for us is also to slowly shift attitudes such that people see that they can fall victim to cyber scams, to cyber threats, and there is a certain risk that they are exposed to. And the last A is in terms of adoption. So after addressing the gaps in awareness and attitudes, what are the simple tools that we can make available for businesses as well as individuals, such that we can nudge them to adopt good cyber hygiene practices to keep themselves safe? So that's how I would kind of frame the overall response to your question. Thanks, Amit.
Okay, thanks, Gwenda. That's a very nice way of putting it. Dato, I'm going to come to you, but before that, I want to bring in Sam on this point to give us a sort of a private sector viewpoint about this ability to sustain the building of resilient networks while keeping innovation alive. What does the private sector think about this? Sam,
sure.
Come to you.
So a couple of perspectives that I'd share there. I mean, your point was really around how do you continue this sort of perpetuation around the government and private sector partnership to ensure that these things keep working in sync. And I think there's a couple of really, really good examples out there. If I look at one particular organization like NIST, for example, obviously defining a lot of the standards that both government and private sector organizations are aligning to, and not just around core areas like cybersecurity, but also emerging areas like privacy and technology risk management. But I think that's one of the really strong success cases of where that engagement between the public and private sector can work very, very well to actually set the pace for how both government and industry operate. So there's some fantastic examples out there from that one particular organisation and many around the region as well. But just thought I would call that particular one out. So that partnership element is really, really key. So driving that engagement so that there's not, only the government perspective that drives the rules and the regulations. It's really, really about that partnership and engagement. Another point that I wanted to mention was around education, and this actually links in a little bit with what Gwenda was mentioning before, but really grassroots education around how to, not just be a corporate employee or how to be a government employee and operate in a secure way, but just how to be a citizen and protect your own life and run your own life in a secure way. So a lot of grassroots education campaigns, I think, are important in delivering on that outcome. And, I know just speaking from RSA's own perspective, over the years, we've been involved not just at the tertiary level, but the secondary all the way down to the primary schooling level to help educate young students and kids about the importance of cybersecurity and how to protect themselves online. And I'd be very excited if more governments were delivering on programs like that, because that will, over time, over the course of the next sort of 10 to 20 years, deliver into the workforce people who have that ingrained from day one.
Thank you, Ben. Now let's quickly move to Dato for his views on this aspect. Dato, you want to share your views?
Okay, when we talk about innovation and when we talk about advancements of technology, it will always keep changing in this digital environment. So the main thing is how to sustain and to ensure it perpetuate innovation during this time. I think the key thing is actually about the change of mindset of the people in the context of cyberspace, whether they are in public sector or in organization, private sector, whatever. I think it starts with the people, mindset change. That's very important. They have to see cybersecurity and being resilient is important in their daily life, whether in their personal life or in their business and operational. And then from there, they need to make it as a culture. Cybersecurity as a culture. And that's how, because to me, when it comes to the issue of cybersecurity or cyber resilience, or whether it's about innovation, it's all about people. And it has to start with the people change, starting with their mindset change, and later on the cultural change.
Okay, thank you so much. So we still have a few minutes, so I'll just pass the stage around for any last thoughts from the three panelists. Ben, you want to put in any last thoughts? 1 minute thought?
Yeah, I think, so Dato, you said it very, very accurately there with the comment around culture. Culture and getting people on board with the journey is absolutely key. So speaking on behalf, again, of our own organisation, a lot of the engagement that we have with our customers is about how do they actually enable and foster a positive risk or compliance or security culture in their own organisation. Now, speaking about that from the private sector perspective, but it is also something I think is important from a government and public sector perspective. Thanks, Amit.
Okay, thanks. For the two, for Gwenda and Dato, who are from the government side, let me give this time for you to send out a big key message to our audience, which is a very good one. And so, Gwenda, you want to give say anything as a key message to the audience?
Okay, so I think the key messages would really be that cybersecurity is a collective responsibility, and government is doing what we can to secure the critical information infrastructure, and now we're moving towards to secure the larger cyberspace as well for Singapore. But as I said earlier, there is a very important role that businesses and end users need to play as well. And I like to say that it is really about a risk management approach, which Sam very neatly summarized in his presentation. It's like, if you want to buy a new house, it's not possible to find a big house that is really cheap, that's in an exclusive neighborhood. So that's the trilemma that we always talk about in terms of security, function, and cost. So as the end user, whether you're a business or individual, you need to figure out what are your security and your risk kind of exposure, what cost you're willing to pay, and what kind of security that you need for your business operations or your risk profile. So that's the parting shot that I would leave with the audience.
Yeah. Okay. Dato, how about you?
Basically, I would say, as you know, the changes are there, the innovation must be there. And the approach is not just about technology, but it's also about the way we approach the whole cybersecurity and cyber resilience. And that need to be, I would say, innovative. And this is where I've highlighted earlier in my presentation, it's about being adaptive. Yeah? Adaptive security, that means not just being responsive or being, I would say, preventive, but the need to also look into the aspect of detective capabilities and predictive capabilities combined, and at the same time highlighting the stress on the aspects of people, mindset change, and culture.
Okay, thank you so much. And I'd like to give a big thank you to all our panelists and the minister who unfortunately couldn't stay with us. And we are well in time, thankfully. And I think we can just hand it over to the next stage of this wonderful GovInsider Live Innovation session that we're having. Thank you again, all of you, for taking the time to take part in this. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amit.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.